#1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hey guys, good afternoon. My name is Matteo Rizzi. I'm the executive producer of Breaking Banks Europe. And today is a special episode with a very special guest. And I'm here with my friend and co-host Paolo Sironi for a super interesting special episode concerning, some work you might not know about in the European Commission. Paolo, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matteo. I'm happy to be here with you today to discuss a very special topic, which is the initiative of the European Commission to build a digital infrastructure across the European countries and continent. And we have two special guests that come from the European Commission to talk at Breaking Banks Europe about all of these important initiatives. First of all, I want to let you know that we're going to talk about three major topics. We will tell you about the Connecting Europe Facility Program, which is a European Commission program that is investing almost 1 billion euros over 7 years to foster the creation of a digital single market and digital infrastructure. As part of this initiative, we have the Building Blocks Initiative, which is an attempt to make optimal usage of reusable technology for business processes. And to conclude, we will discuss about the Digital Innovation Challenge that the European Commission has launched. They screened a variety of startups and SMEs. 10 were selected to the last stage. So we're going to give you some insights about that. But first of all, let me introduce our two guests. We have with us Joan Rodrigues Frade. Welcome, João.
Hello, good afternoon. So welcome, everyone. We are in Brussels here, so it's afternoon for me, and I guess for you as well.
So, João, you are the lead enterprise architect of Connecting Europe Facility Program, and you are responsible for the digital building blocks, correct?
Yes, since 2014, we are running this initiative in the European Commission. What I would like to basically tell your audience is that the European Commission is typically known by basically facilitating the creation of EU-wide regulations and also for the funding programs like Horizon 2020. However, the Commission does also enablement projects, so digital enablement projects. And I come from DG Digits, which is the informatics DG of the European Commission. This all may sound a bit strange, but this is also one of the many things that the Commission does, is to help the member states and also the private sector to become more digital. And we really help at technical level making this happen. So I come from the Director General of Informatics, Digit, and I'm joined by my colleague Kelly. And both of us, we have been running the Connecting Europe Facility program since 2014, together with the DG that does the policy part, that is known as DG Connect. So that's really the DG that is involved in the creation of the regulations. And we are on the side of the technical enablement. So really bringing that infrastructure together so that all these public services, but also the private sector, can benefit from these technologies and the regulatory part that is overarching all of them.
It's going to be a super interesting episode today, right at the heart of Europe. So thanks for mentioning Kelly Liljemo, your colleague. Kelly is a stakeholder manager at Connecting Europe Facility, and she will also discuss and explain what is the Digital Innovation Challenge. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
So let's get back a little bit to understand in more details what is the European Commission thinking about the creation of a digital single market and infrastructure. So you mentioned, Joao, that there are policies and there are technical requirements and discussions. So can you bring us up to speed with what is effectively the role that you have?
Okay, so let's then start from the very top. We all understand, and I think this is why you have this podcast, right? We are all undergoing the so-called digital transformation, correct? And this is, let's say, a worldwide trend. So everything is becoming increasingly more digital. Since the internet has been around, we have increasing connectivity. And what that means is that things that happen only in the physical world start to happen in the digital world. So in the very classic, let's say, setup of the European Union, which at the time was not yet known as a union, right? It was basically a trading area. We had the creation of the single market. And the goal since the very beginning was to enable the free movement of people, the free movement of services, the free movement of capital, and the same has to happen online. So when we see that the physical world moves to the digital world, we have to continue to do this in an European way so that the member states don't create barriers for example, trade, right? They don't create barriers for people to be able to study abroad or to basically work abroad. So we have to continue to have in mind that we have a single area where all these things should happen. And that means that the member states, they have to cooperate, they have to work together to enable the services to go online in a way that is interoperable across them. And I know this is a very, let's say, difficult word, which is interoperability. But this is where my side of the Commission is really looking at, is to ensure that this digital transition from the physical to basically the online world happens respecting these European values and basically the European objectives. And why is this important? Well, as we see, I mean, the number of transactions happening daily, I mean, being traded independently now, of course, of the COVID crisis that we are undergoing, but they are just increasing, right? More and more happens online. You need as well to understand that when you go abroad, for example, and you want to request your ID card, right? You don't want to go back to, in this case, I think Italy, right? To request it. You want to be able to do it from your desk. If you happen to have a problem outside your, let's say, place of origin, you would like, for example, that the hospital is able to access your hospitalization records, right? So that they know, for example, if you are intolerant to some sort of drug, for example. So all this will be enabled through what we call digital infrastructures. So every sector has to basically, similar to what happens in the financial sector, of course, create basically a cooperation online that enables all the member states to exchange information and exchange data. When you go online and you want to enable this dialogue between the member states, you need to have technologies, right, that are based on standards, what we call digital standards, that create the possibility for the participation of the private sector. So this is what we are doing here in the European Commission, and basically together with the member states, is to facilitate the creation of these digital infrastructures in all these different sectors: health, justice, the environment, you name it, everything is going online. So everything requires and depends on the creation of digital infrastructures to work across borders and more also across sectors. So in a nutshell, I hope that this kind of makes sense.
It does, Joao. And actually, yesterday when we were, preparing this conversation, I actually made the point of this sounds like pretty similar to the challenge that SWIFT faced, almost 40 years ago, even if it was a vertical challenge for financial services. And he ended up working in standards infrastructure, and basically network. And these are actually the exact sort of domains that you guys are dealing with right now, with the extra challenge, of course, that this is not only for a given industry, but is actually across industry as well as across sectors and countries, isn't it, Joao?
Yes, exactly. What you see in the financial sector is exactly what I was explaining for all the other sectors. First and foremost, you need regulations, right? Really regulations that enable the data to travel across borders. So you need a common regulatory framework in Europe. You see that in the financial sector. You see that in most of the other sectors that are covered basically by the European treaties, right? So we see that the member states, they have to work and basically come up with a regulatory framework that enables all this data to be shared, all the information to go around and be used. The second thing that you need is money, funding. So this is why the Commission provides different funding programs to create incentives for the member states, but also for the private sector to adopt these new digital technologies. Now, the third part is the technical one. So how do you go about and actually create a digital infrastructure? As you said, you need standards. That's the very beginning. So every sector has to select the right standards so that these multiple players, they can all play according to the same rules. Pretty much like football, right? So when you go and you play football, I can play football with you because we agree on the rules. We agree on how football is played. If I score a goal, that's 1 point, and, and so on and so forth. So those common rules, they are like basically the standards. We all have to agree that we exchange information using this standard and not the other one. I authenticate using this identifier, not the other one. I will express, for example, my electronic invoice in this way and not the other. So once we have all these common rules, one of the main questions is, how do we actually leverage the work done in one sector in another sector? What I'm trying to say is that if I go, for example, and try to study abroad, and I will need to identify myself, in this case, to a university, for example, should that be very different if I do it with a court or if I do it in a hospital? So all the challenges of the sector, of every sector, are very similar. They all need to identify you. So they all need to know that you claim to be Paolo and you are Paolo, for example. Then they all, for example, need to ensure the authenticity of documents. And that in the physical world is done with a blueprint signature. In the digital world is done with an electronic signature. What this means is that many of these technologies, they are reusable across sectors. And as you know, 40 years ago, the sectors, they work really separately. So the financial sector developed itself as a vertical, completely separate from the rest of the world. And the same was happening in the health domain, in the justice domain. So they didn't really cooperate with one another. What does this mean, or what happened was that they could not really exchange data with each other. They could not even identify Paolo, because all of them have developed their common identifiers, and Swift was very smart creating the identifiers actually that then became the standard, but it could have been some other way. And so when you want to, let's say, take it to the next level and you want to start exchanging data and correlating data, so doing smarter things with the data, you cannot. You have these barriers that are caused exactly by the standards that you chose in the beginning to enable that dialogue. So to broaden the dialogue, we have to think differently. We cannot continue to think about sector per sector, and we have to come up with reusable, what we call building blocks. So if you think a bit about Lego, right, it's really about picking the right pieces and then reusing them to construct different, figures or different, toys in this case.
No,
and the same happens here.
Joao, I really like the way you think, and I think you're getting into a very, very relevant topic. So, first of all, what did you say is that the European Commission and yourself for the European Commission is looking for interoperability across countries and across sectors, and therefore the portability of personal data, because I am always Paolo, whether I'm in Italy, in Germany, where I do banking, or I need to go through healthcare request. So now you said that the European Commission thinks of regulation. Of course, that's important. Most of the regulations are are for verticals. It's also relevant to have something that regulates across verticals. Then you said funding is fundamental, and it is, because we need to promote innovation. And then you got to the topic, which is technology. So now the question, and I think you mentioned it when you said the building blocks are there, is how do you use technology to favor interoperability and portability of data across sectors and across countries?
Very good summary. Exactly. So the Connecting Europe facility since 2014 has been basically creating this package of building blocks that you can go and have a look online. And we have basically a cross-sectorial regulation called the EIDAS. So I'll give you an example. For example, the Authentication challenge. We do it with electronic ID. So I am a Portuguese national. I have my Portuguese ID card. Thanks to EIDAS, I will be able to log in to the Belgium tax system and basically file my taxes in Belgium without needing to ask Belgium to issue a Belgium ID card for me. So it means that thanks to this building block, basically EID, I can now use public services from other member states with my ID card from my basically country of origin, Portugal. And this is what is really interoperability, is to make things possible that in the past were unthinkable, right? So if you think about how you go about and you do things abroad, is really wait in line, get the credential or the card that is required in that specific country. We are doing all these things in the background. So people will not even understand that what is actually happening for them to authenticate is that the member states are connected to one another, exchanging information, that there is a regulation cross-sectorial called EIDAS, and that there are standards, in this case SAML, that are enabling all that to happen in microseconds. Isn't this great?
So, Joao, the EIDAS is a European regulation that sets out rules for electronic identification and trust services, right? Which is absolutely relevant.
Correct.
And the building blocks
Correct.
are a way for standardizing the usage of technology for accessing data authentication in a way that interoperability is maximized, or basically is also enabled, because if you don't have common standard, they may not be secure, so cannot be trusted. So can you give me an example of these building blocks? I imagine them like solutions that people can use in terms of protocols to basically build a business process that makes sense across sectors and across countries. Do I have the right understanding?
Yeah, so I gave the example already of EID. So that's a very, let's say, simple one for most people to understand, that you should be able to use your national ID card to authenticate to all sorts of services. And also I'm talking EID is very reusable also by the private sector. If you want to rent a car, you have to basically authenticate yourself to that, or buy a plane ticket. So it's perfectly reusable also by the private sector. So we have one of them, EID, covered by this new regulation called the EIDAS, which is actually EID and trust services. On the trust services side, I'll give you two examples. Electronic signature. So electronic signatures have been around for a long time. What does EIDAS do? So EIDAS is a European regulation. So we are basically regulating the cross-border use of all these different elements. So this is always the challenge of explaining, let's say, these complex things in a simple way. So a regulation regulates the cross-border use of the technologies. That means that the member states continue to regulate inside of their own country. When the basically use happens cross-border, it's regulated by EIDAS. Okay, is this clear? Yeah. So what happens with electronic signature is that when you basically come with a document signed with a certificate coming from another member state, it will now be possible for that same certificate to be recognized anywhere in Europe. And that means that now you have trust across the 28 member states, reducing, therefore, the red tape and reducing the complexity for the citizen, let's say, to have multiple, ways to sign documents and then to ensure that they are recognized by the different member states. The final example I would give is e-delivery. So in the EIDAS regulation, again, they want to enable the possibility of exchange of information across borders. So the delivery of data across borders is named as ERDS, Electronic Registered Delivery Service, which is similar to the post office, to a trusted post office online. So in the case of e-delivery, what is suggested is that different players in the market that offer this secure exchange of data coming from the private sector, they can basically follow the EIDAS regulation and have what is called a trust mark, basically, and show to the users that they are complying with a regulation that ensures the authenticity, the integrity of the data that is being exchanged online. So this is beyond email. So it's kind of an email plus or secured, let's say. So it can be done with different protocols, but this is another component. So 3 very clear building blocks of, let's say, the Connecting Europe facility that can support both the private and the public sector are therefore EID, authentication of people across borders, e-signature, ensure the authenticity of documents through electronic signatures, and ensure that they're recognized across borders, and then the actual exchange of data similar to the post office, but now online, and ensure that the data is exchanged with integrity, meaning that it's not modified, and when you receive it, you are sure to basically be looking at the document that was sent to you and not some, let's say, fake document.
So, João, the European Commission has the ownership and the ambition to facilitate the creation of a unified digital infrastructure, where you said IDs, signature for the verification of documents and data can be shared across countries and across sectors, basically seamlessly. So in your work, you created a building blocks initiative that enables SMEs and startups, whatever company, to take profit from your guidance in order to create these cross-European, across-border solutions that will enable these companies to access a market which is at their disposal, but somehow is always a bit more fragmented than what we would love to be. And that brings us into the topic of how you help the SMEs and the startup to understand the value of the building blocks in order to create solutions that will resonate and stand out at the level of the European-wide digital infrastructure, which brings us into the topic of the Digital Innovation Challenge with Kelly. Kelly, would you like to tell the Breaking Banks Europe audience a bit more about the Digital Innovation Challenge, which I believe started in November last year, and you had screening of a variety of contenders until February this year, and then, if I'm not mistaken, you selected 10, which are basically the winners to get into the last stage.
Yes, exactly. And this, in order to maybe to step back first to look at what was behind launching this, is because obviously all of this initiative and the work on these building blocks, what we wanted to make sure is that we do it in an inclusive way where the private sector can benefit from this all as well, and also help to accelerate the take-up. And if we look at the market in Europe, then SMEs, they represent a substantial part of the economy. But when we looked at the reuse, they were only forming a small part of the businesses that were involved. So looking at that and starting from this question, we wanted to launch an initiative that would really target SMEs and startups to understand how we could better involve them. And when framing the problem, we looked at the adoptions we had. And what was interesting was what these stories had in common. And in the dialogue we had with them, we were discussing about why and how these building blocks were so important for their business. And we found 3 things or 3 patterns that came out from that. We summarized those patterns as think big, play smart and stand out. So Think Big was about broadening the vision for a bigger impact. By default, Joao has been explaining about this being cross-border, closed sector, and essentially facilitating compliance with different regulations. So using these building blocks would by default make it easier to reach across border and larger market. So that was one of the reasons that we observed in the users to expand on markets faster. We had one example of a user of a context broker where they used this building block to collect and consolidate data from different devices in a smart city scenario. And the second reason that we were observing was that we summarized as Play Smart is about reinforcing the position in the market using solutions that scale. Here we have published these stories, so my summary will be maybe not giving them the best sales pitch, essentially, but you can read them online. But here our example is a marketplace by a company with my deed that provides this platform for different logistics providers to connect and communicate with customers, and they used e-delivery to make that happen quickly. And the last pattern or reason was about standing out, so enhancing visibility with something that is a bit more niche. Here we have an example of reusing e-signature to achieve the status of a qualified trust service provider. This is something that is under the IDAS regulation, which Joao already explained about. And essentially this company used e-signature to make that happen more quickly, enabling their payment value chain service.
So, Kelly, you basically said that you invited a set of SMEs and startups to propose their initiative to participate to the challenge. And you screened them looking at three major elements. Their capability of thinking big, so being capable of going cross-border, making sure that compliance is not an issue, but an opportunity to integrate. Playing smart, so looking at solutions that scale or smart city scenarios could be an example. And finally, being capable of standing out, so provide visibility to the digital initiatives in Europe. Now, these shortlisted candidates that got into the final stage are, let me spell their names because it's relevant for our audience. We have Open Content, we have Business Reporting Advisory Group, we have Cleverbooks, we have Compellio, we have Crowd Policy, we have Bit4ID, we have Latitude of 40, we have T-Mining, we have Orange Books, and we have Parity Platform. So can you just give us a very high-level description of which are the challenges that they want to solve? You can pick up a couple of, maybe we'll even have time in the future to present and introduce them all to our audience. But if you just give us a couple of examples.
Maybe I can start with Orange Book because maybe for your audience most relevant given it's in the fintech area. They are coming with a solution which aims to drive down the cost of bookkeeping, targeting micro businesses in a European market, essentially using AI to create kind of a private accountant for micro businesses so that they can focus on whatever business they are setting up and removing such kind of barrier. We also published kind of an insights report where we give more detail on the different sectors because we received, so you already mentioned, we launched this in November last year at the Web Summit and we closed in February, and we received 49 applications in different sectors. There were finances, government, mobility, education, etc. And almost all of them use more than one of our solutions. The most popular ones were blockchain, eID, e-signature, and so on. And they all had different ways of using them. Some of them used them as a service to develop their service or their unique selling value proposition. Some of them as a technology or infrastructure to build or on in order to accelerate their business, or as just kind of a plug and play library to use into their whatever platform or service or solution that they are providing. And all of these kind of fit into those three patterns that we observed in the beginning.
Think big, play smart, stand out. So Kelly, that's very, very interesting. And I am a cross-border individual between Italy and Germany. My accountant knows that I can expect more because we have a cross-border solution for that problem. Now, The Digital Innovation Challenge is basically going to be concluded this year, and I guess you will select one of these companies and will award a prize to them. But definitely the challenge doesn't finish here, and it continues for Europe. How, before we conclude this episode, would you like to spend a couple of words to tell our audience what you see in the future of the European digital infrastructure looking at the next 2, 3 to 4 years?
Well, I will also give some moments for Joao to comment on that. Maybe I can also first give a little bit the next step in the challenge itself. Indeed, exactly as you said, we will select the winners, but we are now in the stage of having selected the top 10, and we will come back with more detail about those. But the next step with those top 10 is to invite them to a boot camp where we will coach them. And this will essentially be kind of a co-creation session where we work together with each of the application or applicants to look at their idea and transform it into a pilot scenario with a kind of a roadmap as a good basis to start the implementation, and with a good story that they will present in front of a jury and at an award ceremony. And in the award ceremony, we will have then top 3 that will win up to 50,000 euros. Essentially, the bootcamp was supposed to already have taken place, but given the ongoing pandemic, we had to revamp a little bit the formatting of it. But indeed, it will all take place this year, and also the payment of the awards once the top 3, following the pitching to the jury, will have done. And all of this should be completed before the end of the year. And obviously, we hope that this also will become inspirational success stories for others to show how the building blocks can empower their business. And that, also the SMEs and the startups can be part of involving and evolving the way that we do this, because essentially with this context, what we wanted to do is to involve the SMEs in a new interactive way. And it's been really a perfect channel because we found a lot of inspiring innovation happening around this from this experience, and they are taking the building blocks and doing things with them that we could not have thought of ourselves. So we look forward to seeing these kind of ideas materialize into reality.
Kelly, we also look forward, we at Breaking Banks Europe and our audience are going to look at that very closely. For whomever wants to get more information, they can basically type in ec.europa.eu and search for more about the Digital Innovation Challenge. Joao, just a minute to wrap up. What do you see in the future of the digital infrastructure of Europe?
I think in the current times that we are living, we need optimism, right? I think this is the message we would like to leave to the audience. There are many exciting things happening. The European Commission is here to accelerate and basically ensure that we have all these, let's say, bright ideas materialize into something. So we are working now in basically coming up with a new program that will replace the Connecting Europe facility that will be called Digital for Europe. And Digital Europe will become, let's say, the new home of the building blocks. And this means that the future is bright, and that, of course, we would like all of you that are listening to check the building blocks in our website. And in case you would like to know more about them, don't hesitate to contact us. So either me or Kelly or our team is here to provide you with more information. And we look forward to really hearing from all of you in the future. So just go online, have a look, and don't hesitate to reach out.
Okay, sure. So I guess that the new initiative is called Digital Europe Program, the final name that will replace the Connecting Europe facility. We are all looking forward to learn more about that, and maybe we could dedicate another episode of Breaking Banks Europe to discuss in more details about this, as it is super relevant for Europe and for our audience. So I thank everybody. Matteo Rizzi, that was co-hosting this episode with me. Joan Rodrigues Frade, lead enterprise architect of the Connecting Europe facility, soon Digital Europe program at the European Commission level, and Kelly Liljemo, who is stakeholder manager at the Connecting Europe facility, taking care of the Digital Innovation Challenge. Thanks for being with us. Breaking Banks Europe will be back next week. This is a special episode, and this is a wrap.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.